I'm Henry Louis Gates Jr. I'm thrilled to welcome you to this local event for our newest series, The Black Church. This is our story, this is our song, exploring the 400-year-old history of the Black Church in America. You'll be transported by the songs, by preaching styles, and by beliefs and actions that drew African Americans from the violent margins of society to the front lines of change. I'm honored to have the support of your local station. Thank you for being here today.
Welcome, everyone. On behalf of Louisiana Public Broadcasting and Louisiana's HBCU Advisory Council, we would like to thank you for joining us for this safe, socially distant, virtual Black History Month event. I am Robyn Merrick, and tonight with our wonderful panel of experts, we will explore the role of Louisiana's Black Church from the civil rights movement to the music, and even talk a bit about the future of the church. This is all in anticipation of the PBS two-part series, The Black Church. This is our story, this is our song, from Henry Louis Gates Jr., which premieres on LPB next Tuesday and Wednesday at 8 p.m. And you're going to get a sneak peek at that series in just a moment. But first, a man who knows a great deal about the Black Church, our special guest this evening, Dr. Samuel C. Talbert Jr., president of the National Baptist Convention of America International and pastor of the Greater St. Mary Missionary Baptist Church in Lake Charles, Louisiana. Good evening, Dr. Talbert, and welcome.
Thank you very much, and good evening to you, Dr. Merrick.
So very glad that you can join us on this special occasion this evening to talk about something I know you know a great deal about. And I'd like to ask you first, do you think we need a series like this one? And if so, why?
I think we need a series like this on the Black Church, especially in Louisiana, because the Black Church has, is, and shall remain an important institution in our society. The Black Church has spiritually nurtured our communities, motivated educational pursuits and achievements that have produced outstanding leaders and activists around our state and around our nation. It has been an organization that has provided for the network of entrepreneurship and constituency investment. The civil rights movement in particular would not have been as successful without the Black Church in Louisiana, that had leaders like the late Reverend Dr. Theodore Judson Jimerson, that organized the bus boycotts in Baton Rouge that were used as a model around the South. And so the church is still needed as she provides for the fostering of the growth and development of our communities for generations to come. From the institution of grade schools, classes in Sunday school classrooms, to the birth and support of historically Black colleges, the Black Church has been responsible for the establishment of credit unions, licensed daycare centers, tutoring support, and even adult education classes for high school dropouts. I am grateful for the contribution of the Black Church in Louisiana and all it has done even to support me personally. As I sit here tonight, I am now the pastor of the historically Black Church, Greater St. Mary Missionary Baptist Church that I grew up in, and now I have been serving as the pastor for some 37 years. I now lead one of the largest Black church organizations in the world, the National Baptist Convention of America International, because of the Black church's training and nurture that I've received right here in Louisiana. So tonight, I'm thankful for Louisiana's Black Church.
Thank you so much, Dr. Talbert. And as you just attested, the Black Church is very unique with a remarkable and rich history. What is one part of that history that you would like to see highlighted in this documentary?
What I would like to see highlighted in this documentary about the Black Church is the role that the Black Church plays not only in religion, but the role that the Black Church plays in community. Our community is what it is in the Black communities because of the church. Is almost the centerpiece of our community. And I'd like to see that highlighted in this documentary.
Yes, sir. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Talbert, for joining us this evening. We're very grateful to have you here and your voice as you represent Baptist members across this globe. And of course, the work that you're doing in Lake Charles, Louisiana. And our prayers are still with you all in the community in Lake Charles as you continue to recover.
Thank you very much for having me. And I look forward to this series.
Fantastic. If anyone can take 400 years of history and tell it in 4 hours, it's PBS and Henry Louis Gates Jr. On making this series, Henry Gates said, "No social institution in the Black community is more central and important than the Black church." The series is a riveting and systemic exploration of the myriad ways in which the African Americans have worshiped God and how they continue to do so today. So here's a sneak peek at the upcoming PBS series, The Black Church. This is our story. This is our song. Wow, that was powerful. Let's talk about it with our panelists who represent Louisiana's historically Black colleges and universities. Joining us on this exploration tonight are Dr. Charles Vincent, Professor of History and University Historian, Southern University and A&M College, Reverend Herbert Brisbane, Chaplain, Dillard University, Dr. Charlene Senegal DeQueer, Chair, History Department, Xavier University of Louisiana, Mr. Tarsha Davis, Assistant Professor of Vocal Music and Choral Director, Grambling State University. If you have any questions for our panel this evening, just type them in the chat box. We might not be able to answer all of the questions, but we are going to do as many of the questions as we can possibly get to. I know you have a lot of questions on your mind, a number of things swirling through your head as you've watched this preview of the documentary. So many themes were explored this evening in this preview reel, and unfortunately, we won't be able to cover everything tonight. But Dr. Vincent, I'm going to start with you. The Civil Rights Movement. Louisiana churches were front and center in that movement. The Mount Zion First Baptist Church in Baton Rouge, Little Union and Old Galilee Baptist churches in Shreveport, and so many are central to our story. Would you care to share a bit about that?
Good evening. I'll be happy to. You're exactly right. And one of the things that we should understand about these churches are that their leadership were trained individuals, and many of these leaders were descendants of men such as Reverend T.J. Jemison, whose father, David Jemison, had been trained at Selma University in Alabama, had been a big leader and civil rights advocate in Alabama. And his son was continuing that tradition. You mentioned some of the churches in Shreveport, Galilee, and New Canaan, and Good Hope. All of these churches had traditions of resisting segregation, and they pushed for justice for Black people. Indeed, many of these schools, in fact, at the start of Howard University, there was, in Washington, D.C., there was a big debate as to what should be the name of it, whether it should be a theological normal school or should it be a liberal art college. So these leaders of the schools and teachers and principals tried to apply what they learned in their religious training to see if we could connect with the teachings of Jesus, who talked about your neighbors as yourself, being thy brother's keeper. So these churches, with these trained leaders and educators, and the same thing with the principals and teachers in many of our schools, they knew the Constitution, they knew the Bible, so they pushed for justice in their own way. Some more vividly and more openly and more noted than Reverend T.J. Jemison here, but all of them in their own way tried to put in place programs and policies that talked about the dignity of human being, justice for all. You should be not harmful to your brother, as the white community may have been in many of these communities, but you should practice what you're preaching in your church. And hence, the parishioners took this out, and some of them would become more outstanding leaders than others. But all of them would certainly try to perpetuate the teachings of Jesus Christ in their daily life and to their parishioners.
Thank you, Dr. Vincent. With the current calls for social justice, do you see churches answering that call not like they did in the past? And this is for you, Dr. Senegal DeQueer. I know you teach a course on hip hop and social justice. What do you think the role of the church is at this moment in time?
I think at this moment in time, the church is really trying to find their role in the movement, in this current new movement. The church is trying to figure out how to navigate the young people and what their needs are. And so I think right now, our young people, they're looking for direction. They're looking for someone to guide them. But I do feel that the young people are grounded in their religious beliefs and in their faith. And I believe that they understand the importance of the African American church. And I believe that they are looking towards that. I know at Xavier, we have the mission of social justice. And on our campus, our students are extremely active. They go out into the community and they march and they talk about the issues, they tweet about it, they use all of their social media platforms to do so. And so the church is now, again, they have to just move with these young folks. They have to get with the new times, with the new ages, with the social media movement, and they need to progress along with our kids, because our kids need that. They need that grounding that only religion and only the Black church can give us in order to sustain a movement that I know that we're going to have to, carry on for it.
That's a good point you make about the impact of social media. And I don't know if the full documentary is going to touch on that, but certainly social media has infused itself into every aspect of our lives. And I would imagine, like you said, the church is not sacred in that regard, that it will be safe from the impact of social media. So thank you for that, Dr. Senegal DeQueer. As we saw in the preview during the civil rights movement, the importance of music in the Black church. And music has always been an important part of the church, but not everyone realized the importance of gospel music in the fight for justice. So Ms. Davis, our singer of the group tonight, gospel music was the soundtrack for the civil rights movement, and it still continues to be a key component of worship. What say you about that?
Yes, and I like the way you expressed that or used the term, it was the soundtrack. That background that you hear, even in this documentary, the soundtrack of the old spirituals, or the soundtrack of the call and response, the soundtrack of the old 100 at the beginning of worship services, guide me over thy great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land. All of those things have led to where we are musically. We've moved from soloists and duets and trios and quartet singers to huge mass choirs. And now we're drifting in this praise and worship mode. And in the midst of this pandemic, we're back down to groups of 2s and 3s and trios and quartets just to maintain social distancing, but the music still stands. Also, the wide variety of the sounds and the lush harmonies and the chords, it all began speaking mainly from the Negro spiritual, and we've progressed through those freedom songs, and now we're into gospel music. And our contemporary gospel music still embraces the traditions that we had from the beginnings.
I can just think about, as we were preparing to have our conversation this evening, thinking about some of the old Negro spirituals and hymns, that the moment you strike just one verse, you'll get the entire church going. And that may be one of the chords, no pun intended on chords, but one of the chords that has run throughout history as it relates to the Black church is our music. Some of the other things may have changed in terms of the delivery of what we do. Excuse me, but what has not changed is the music and the way the music moves us, I would say. Excuse me, it's moving me right now in my throat. Just thinking about it, and I am definitely no singer. And I wish we could maybe have a hymn or so here this evening. And I'm going to move over to Reverend Brisbane with Dillard University. Let me turn a bit to talk about the future of the church, if we could. In particular, the engagement or maybe even the lack thereof of our young people in attending church. A recent Pew Research Center study found that the biggest generational drop-off in regards to regular church attendance is with our millennials. And so how do we get them back? How do we do that?
Some of that is going to have to require the church to get back to its missional origin and being intentional about creating opportunities for tangible engagement. Many of them are not concerned about the anniversaries or the mission days, but they would like to see, how do we get out there and become relevant? And it's kind of interesting, this past semester, I taught a class entitled Black Church in America. And one of the young ladies, and I had to go back and capture this piece because it spoke so relevant. And she was just sharing about how she was disappointed with the church and really wondered, why were they doing this? And it was actually dealing with a food drive where the church had just set the food outside and didn't care about the person. And she was like, why would you do that? Why, if you say that you love someone, why would you not value the person? And so she took it upon herself to begin to collect food and things of that nature to go out and meet the needs of the community. And so they're looking for tangible witnesses. They don't necessarily have to be in the church for 4 hours. It's about now finding places where they can live out their faith and see the tangible witness of what it means to be a loving community. And not only that, even with the prophetic voice, they want to see, how do we as a church, then you say that we were founded on this premise, have you lost your heartbeat for injustices? And how do we then in turn begin to advocate for that? Because again, that's going to be, I would say those are two things that we really will have to be intentional about recreating. I wouldn't necessarily say recreating, reconnecting to the main purpose and thrust of the church in today. Because even with my worship service on Sunday nights at 6:30, we call it the experience. It's not just the traditional, but it's about including everyone. One of the pieces that's another piece that they talk about. How can I come to a church that want to ostracize people? When you're going to tell me that we serve a God of love, but because you have those that are same gender loving, those that may think a little bit different than ourselves, why would I want to go to that church? Why would I want to spend my time there when I can still see God in my activities of engaging my brother and sister who are just like me, but at the end of the day, they just do something a little bit different than I do. So so the church is going to have to be truthful in addressing some things, as was talked about a little bit in the series.
Thank you, Reverend Brisbane, for that. We definitely want to keep this conversation going. If you have any questions, please place them in the chat, and we're going to try to get to those as they come. Dr. Senegal Dequeer, I want to come back to you. You're at Xavier University, and Louisiana is unique in so many ways. And one of those ways is the large number of Black Catholics that we have here in our state, and we probably outnumber any state. And certainly the fact that we have a Black Catholic university, the only one of its kind in the nation. Would you speak to the intersection of the Black church and the Catholic church in Louisiana?
Absolutely. You know, I could talk about this for about an hour, but the short version is, and I'll try to make it a short version. The short version is, first of all, the uniqueness of Catholicism in the state of Louisiana goes back to colonialism. The fact that Louisiana was colonized by the French and then the Spanish and then the French again. And when they came over, they brought the Catholic faith with them. And so when they came in and they brought the Catholic faith with them, they started to convert their slaves to Catholicism. And so that's how we have the strong legacy of Catholic Church in Louisiana. And so Louisiana is actually one of the states that has the largest numbers of Black Catholics because of that legacy going back to slavery. And New Orleans in particular is the largest area where you have the Black Catholics, and then next is Lafayette. And I've belonged to both of those parishes, to the Diocese of New Orleans and also to the Diocese of Lafayette. And it's a really rich history. I could tell you in 1912, St. Paul, that Catholic church, was the second largest Catholic church in the state and in the United States. And from that church, you had the creation of schools. They had the St. Paul Catholic Church, which, here's a fun fact, Dr. Norman C. Francis actually graduated from there and then went on to Xavier University. And so Xavier University basically became a feeder school for all of the African-American Catholic kids throughout the state of Louisiana. It was the only place where parents felt safe enough, to bring their kids and leave their kids there, because they knew they were going to get an amazing education, one, and they were going to also be educated in the faith. We had nuns there galore. Currently, we only have 2 nuns right now that are still on campus from the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament, which is, sad. But again, that's a larger story. But the history of the Catholic Church and Black Catholicism is very, very strong in Louisiana.
So,
And that's the
Dr.
short version.
Thank you for the short version. I know I'm dealing with all academics here tonight, and you all are used to speaking in an hour and a half blocks of time to your classes. So we do appreciate the abbreviated version as much as possible so we can get to our questions. But Dr. Senegal Dequeer, I did want to add, there's a question in the chat, and that is from Mr. Abram, and he's asking, was there a clash between the Black Catholics and other Black denominations during the civil rights movement? Did we see a clash there, or was it unified?
No, there was not a clash between any of the churches, the religious affiliations at all. I don't think that there was a clash. There was a clash between Catholics in themselves, between Black Catholics and white Catholics. That's really the only clash that you did see. But in terms of the civil rights movement and Black Catholics actually going out there to participate in the marches and the struggle, they absolutely did that. But then if you look at what was happening in the church itself, right? So in the Catholic Church, with African-American people coming into the priesthoods, I think around 1948, there was about only 106 African-American priests in Catholic Black priests in the United States. And another fun fact, Joseph Francis, brother of Dr. Francis, was actually the 4th bishop, United States Catholic bishop in the United States. And so I think within the church, there were struggles with the civil rights movement, but the actual congregants, of the church, they were very active.
Okay, thank you for that. This is a question for Dr. Vincent, if you will. Can you speak to the role of the Black church, especially in rural communities post-emancipation? So we're post-Civil War, slaves are freed. What was the role of the Black church, particularly in rural communities, not in our cities?
The Black church was crucial. It was the backbone in many of the rural communities, basically because during slavery, Blacks wanted to learn how to read, and they wanted to learn how to read the Bible. So once they did get access to education, they would certainly try to spread it, obtain it, gain it in every way they possibly could. And in the rural areas was a little bit more difficult, but normally, as I was trying to say earlier, that the leadership in these rural areas in many of our churches were normally the educated, they were the individuals who were the teachers, they may have been the preachers, they may have been the head deacons. So in the rural areas, those who gained some education normally could be in leadership roles within the communities and within their churches. Now, once again, some of these rural churches may have only had church twice a week, or twice a month, rather, or once a month. So that inhibited their getting the word as often as they should. But they gravitated towards whatever church was there, because I think, as one of the speakers says on the documentary, it was the armor that kept us sane, you see. And normally during slavery, those individuals who had a chance to be in a church, they always want the pastor to preach from the Old Testament, because in the Old Testament, you see God saving the people in a miraculous way. Moses, that's why Harriet Tubman is called the Moses of her people, because just like Moses in the Bible, he led them across the Red Sea, and David in the lion's den. So in the rural areas, you had the church, and as our universities came online, what I was saying about Howard there was a question about at the origins of Howard, what kind of institution it should be. And then as Howard got off running and started, just like at Southern, many of the teachers, the administrators had a strong religious connection. In fact, J.S. Clark at Southern was called our Pastor Clark. Southern was almost seen as a religious refuge. And if you had a chance to come to any of these campuses with Vesper and Wednesday night services, you had a chance to hear the word. And those are mandatory attendance even. And so in the rural areas, if you got graduates of Grambling, Bishop, Southern, Alcorn State or Jackson State, you knew you had a way to connect educationally, all as well as your Christian faith. But it was certainly a struggle in those rural areas because of transportations and communications and that factor. But they gravitated to the church wherever it was in all of our communities. And they were the centerpiece of those communities.
So Dr. Vincent, that's a good point you bring up about the Black church and the Black universities, which is one of the reasons we were connecting the two tonight in our conversation. Even though institutions like Southern and Grambling State are public institutions and not necessarily tied to a religious affiliation, their roots were very much still rooted in faith, I would say. And you saw the connection there to the church, even though they were public institutions. I think that's an important point to note in the formation of our Black schools, because everything really emanated from the church. As we saw on the screener just now, many things emanated in the Black community from the church. I did want to add a question that we have in our chat coming from the audience. Another question is meeting missionary needs to live out our faith. Digital communities are growing beyond the pandemic. So I think we're going to see this digital presence of church beyond the pandemic. She's asking, can we address the importance of the virtual Black church community? And I'll give that to you, Reverend Brisbane, if you would respond.
Sure, I think that's going to be paramount. If the Black church plans to survive, it's going to have to evolve and become contextually sound in its engagement with its constituents. And I use constituents on purpose because at the end of the day, they are the ones that's buying the Jesus that you're selling. And the question is, how do you make it relevant for the individual? And a lot of times our churches are dying because we refuse to become contextually sound for our communities and even for the young people. And if you begin to look at the age of the civil rights, it was a marrying of both young and old in order to continue to the movement. And if the Black church does not become more intentional about communicating virtually, they're going to miss an entire group of people because they're refusing to acquiesce. They're refusing to get on Zoom. And I think about, and me being a United Methodist ordained elder and having served some very seasoned churches, I'll use that expression. And that's going to be a major struggle across the board. It doesn't matter if you're Methodist, Baptist, we all have our traditions that we're trying to hold on to, but how do you become relevant for now? And one of the things that I love about Jesus, if you go back and look at Jesus, wherever he went, he was able to become contextually sound wherever he was. And are we doing a disservice by saying, oh no, we're just going to be on conference call. Oh no, we're just going to be. So how do we become relevant? And that's going to be crucial in the days to come. And really what helped to force that into my attention was Thanksgiving about 6 years ago, sitting there with my cousins. And it was a younger set of cousins. And most, I think at the time, the oldest was about 12 or 13. And every now and again, I would hear snickle. And I couldn't figure out why, because my cousins that I grew up with, and we're basically those millennials, we're sitting there like, what's going on? And those of us in the Black community know in the holidays, you're accustomed to hearing the stories. You're accustomed to hearing the laughter. But for this younger generation that are 13 years, my junior, my sister, and all of them, and so that I then in turn snatched one of their phones, like, what are y'all doing? We're talking. And I'm like, you're talking? And it was like, yeah, we're texting one another. I said, no, we're going to put the phone down. We need to talk with one another. And so that whole oral tradition is going to be lost if we're not careful. And how do we reinforce that? Even though I advocate for the change, but there has to be a balance between the two. And it's up to us to do that. So how do we marry that? Because if it wasn't for Elisha and Elijah, we would not have that. You see what I'm saying? And we can go on down and look at Naomi and Ruth. It was someone always there to interpret and communicate what's going on. And so that's going to be essential in days to come, because this pandemic is not going anywhere. And how do we then in turn address grief? How do we address anxiety? Because if we are not meeting those needs, there's going to be a massive exodus because we're not being intentional about being relevant and contextually sound to our young people or to those that are virtually sound.
Yeah,
I can go on and on and on about that, but I'm a hush.
No, I understand. It's great. It's a great conversation, but it piques the mind to talk about, the notion of passing the stories down and how do we pass them down in a virtual context. So we've got to be able to marry up the old and the new in order to continue to survive. I think that's very important. I want to switch gears just a little bit back to music, because it's so important in the Black church. And it's one of the things that I think in this pandemic environment that we're living in right now, I can personally say I miss the most about the worship experience, in that the Black worship experience, in that I don't have the rhythmic vibes of the church anymore. I'm in my house and I'm singing the song, and it's not nearly as good as the choir and the musicians at the church. So it's not the same. So a portion of the title of the documentary, This Is Our Story, This Is Our Song, is taken from a very old Methodist hymn, Blessed Assurance. And I feel very confident that nearly everyone viewing this evening could immediately start humming that song or singing it. Blessed Assurance, Jesus is mine. This is my story. This is my song. You know it because you've been hearing it all your lives. So this speaks to the power and influence of music in the church. And I want this, Ms. Davis, rather, this is for you. How do you think music may play a role in the sustenance of the church's future? We've talked about some of the things that we need to do for the church's future, but how will music sort of fit into that?
In my mindset, coming from one musician's mindset, music is not going anywhere. It's only going to progress and it's going to get better. And in the church, singing is necessary for worship, the same way breath is for life. We need that song, we need that music, we need the chords. In some churches, we need the beat of the drum. In other churches, we need the sound of that tambourine. It draws on our emotions, and we still need that in the future. Music is only going to progress. I think the sounds that are being created now by so many of the artists, I'm like, where do they get this from? The talent that they've been blessed with and the skill set that they're learning as they progress through just music schools and just time and tutelage from other musicians and mentorship. I can only imagine where it's going to be 10 years from now. It's relevant for the church. It's relevant that we have a nice worship set prior to the opening scripture or text that's taken from the preacher, because it prepares our heart to hear the word of God. Where are we going to be in the future? Like he said a second ago, Reverend Xavier, he said, how can it be relevant in our life? How are we going to make it important, especially for the youth? How are we going to keep it relevant? It's needed. I'm not quite sure how to do it in this pandemic. Yes, we're walking around humming and singing to ourselves and listening to old songs. And when we get online, we hear some of this new stuff, and it still doesn't feel like it would feel if we were truly sitting in the house of God. I'm trusting that a day will come, we'll get back to that point. But right now, our mindset of thinking, how can we come together and come up with something in agreement that music is going to stay relevant and vital even in today.
So Ms. Davis, I'm sure being on a college campus, you're familiar with DJ Nice and the things that he has done at the beginning of the pandemic or throughout the pandemic. He was doing these sort of, I guess you were calling them house parties on Facebook Live. Do you envision us doing a DJ Nice version of the sort of the choir director and we'll get into the music? And I know I'm marrying up the secular with the church, but he's very effective. People have watched him and followed him throughout the pandemic. So is that something that the Black church may want to consider?
Believe it or not, you have a lot of artists that are doing night concerts, sheds online. I'll give you an example. Fred Hammond does these concerts, midnight concerts, and he's actually posting things like every other week. Tasha Cobbs has done concerts. A lot of secular artists have done concerts as well. They have to do things to stay active. Some are free just so they can stay relevant. Some cost $1 or $2 or $3 because, you know, people are lacking in the finances right now. But yes, what he did was very relevant. It got people involved, and I do foresee artists and musicians, and even just having a nice praise and worship team do an hour worth of music online. It's happening. It's happening. So yes, I do see that moving forward and becoming something that is done on a regular if we stay in the midst in this pandemic as we are.
Absolutely. Going to switch gears yet again because Dr. Gates did touch on this, and this is one of the questions that's in our audience chat. He touched on the role of women in the church. And we see that women make up the majority of the lay people, if you will, in the church. But the question is becoming, you know, how do we improve upon that? And I'm assuming the question is about women in leadership. It doesn't say that, but I'm assuming that's what you're speaking to. So Dr. Senegal DeQueer, would you like to tackle that one?
Absolutely. And I could say, just as what was shown in the documentary, they always talk about how the church is the backbone or the pillar of the community. And I would say that women are the backbone of that pillar. Okay. And the reason is because, you know, women are the organizers. They're the ones that's fundraising. They're the ones that are actually the true leaders of the church. But traditionally, they have always been pushed to the background. And that has a lot to do, as Dr. Gates said in the documentary, with the gender norms and the whole cult of domesticity in America. It not only placed Black women in the background, but all women in the background, right? We were supposed to be the support staff to our men. And so even with the civil rights movement, we have been the heart of the movement. The women have been the heart of the movement. Martin Luther King Jr. would have never decided to tackle or to lead the Montgomery bus boycott had it not been for Coretta Scott King urging him to stand up for our people, right? And so it's always a Black woman that is always there in the background pushing for more. Look at Ella Baker. She said, you know, we are more than just a hamburger and all of those things. But the thing is that what we have to realize is that the leadership of Black women is needed in America. We see Kamala Harris right now. She's providing leadership in America, but we've always had that strong leadership of Black women. And I think it's now our time to shine. I think it's finally come to the time where African-American men and men in general are ready to allow us to step into our light.
Awesome. Thank you. And I know there are many women who are watching this evening and will watch this documentary when it airs on next week, particularly the impact of Kamala Harris and what she's doing as our nation's first female vice president is going to speak volumes even over into the church and other areas of leadership. I do have a question that's something that came out as recently as last week, and that is Louisiana has now introduced its new civil rights trail. Here in Louisiana, and the Black church is dotted throughout that trail. Dr. Vincent, I know you worked with the Lieutenant Governor's office on the rollout of the Civil Rights Trail for Louisiana. Would you share with us a bit about the Black church and its role in particularly as in this Civil Rights Trail that we will see throughout the state?
Yes, and that was unveiled, as you indicated, a few days ago. And it's a work in progress, but many of the sites that are already extinct or existing are our churches. So the trail tried to network with those sites that existed And so the churches are still there, Plymouth Rock, Mount Zion, Galilee up in Shreveport, and Canaan. If they are not on there, they'll probably be placed on there. So we know the importance of the church in the civil rights movement. We know that these buildings exist. We know the names of the leaders of these congregations. So that's a great avenue to get the community to come out and support the trail, to be a part of the trail, and to be able to reach and touch the trail. The churches are, as has been said, the backbone of our communities. The women, as has been said, were instrumental in what happened in Georgia politically and throughout the country. So the church is a vital part of the trail. There would be no trail had not churches stepped up to the plate and put forth with their leadership, with their educational program, with all that they did in the struggle in our communities. Indeed, when I was growing up in the rural areas, my elementary school was named Damascus. The church 3 blocks away was named Damascus, Church of God in Christ Holiness. And we played other little schools where the kids at St. Peter and St. Maurice and Antioch was actually in the church, and the pews were used as desks as they kneeled on their knees to write. So these churches are vital in educating us. They are vital in providing this leadership, and certainly they are a major part of this civil rights trail. And this is the third bite at this apple, and I've been at all of the bites of this apple going back 35 years, and I'm glad to see something come to fruition. And I look forward to, and I invite all of the listening audience to make suggestions, because it's a work in progress, and we have cutouts and we have other things that you can go and observe in this trail and on this trail.
Thank you, Dr. Vincent. He's right, that trail is going to be very interpretive, such that you're not just looking at something, but you're able to actually see the story, read about the story on the website as well as at the site itself. So there's several ways to interact with that trail, and I'm looking forward to it as well. So thank you, Dr. Vincent, for your work with the Lieutenant Governor's Office, and you as well, Dr. Senegal DeQueer. You all came together to help to launch that effort.
Yeah, I add something to what Dr. Vincent just said.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to say that there was a question about how you're going to keep the oral traditions alive. Well, this is a way that Louisiana is going to keep those oral traditions alive, because if you go through and you go from one end of the state to the next end of the state, you can follow the markers, and those markers will allow you to have engaging conversations with your children about what happened in Louisiana and Louisiana's civil rights movement and how it impacted the United States. And so I think this is extremely important, an extremely important thing. You can put field trips around this and all of that. The oral history will come out of this trail.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Thank you for that point. And to that, also to that point, we're very glad to be from one end of the state to the other with our panelists this evening, representing New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and even North Louisiana with Grambling State University. We're very glad to have this partnership come together. One last question in the chat box, and that is, Mr. Clifford is asking, at the onset of the conversion of Africans to Christianity, our ancestors maintained an African spirituality and worship African gods. In what ways have we sustained this synchronicity? Reverend Brisbane, do you want to take that one? And I'm tossing it to you, Reverend Brisbane, because the Methodist connection with Dillard and the AME influence has largely tried to capture all of that from its inception.
One of the things that I love about our history, even here at Dillard, and something that I inherited upon my entrance here as the chaplain, is our freshmen. They have what we call a drumming ceremony. It's just one of the many ceremonies that we try to incorporate from our ancestry. in helping them to cross over. And it's more of the parents now handing the students off to us in order to continue their matriculation into adulthood. And that ceremony is one of the more powerful ones. And I mean, if you think about some of us and some of the things that we do in our traditional experiences, there are things that we do embrace on a regular Sunday morning, just from the simple times of prayer, just connecting with simple ancestral connections of how do we pay homage to our ancestors or our elders. Those are things that we really embrace from that African connection. And that's one of the things that I love that is near and dear to me. Is how do we make sure that there's a connection between those things? Because one of the pieces that we talk about in my class is looking at African religion and putting it, juxtaposing it against Christianity and seeing how we incorporate some of those things into who we are, the rites of passage that we try to incorporate, naming ceremonies and things of that nature. So those are just a few pieces that I know that we try to maintain on our campus as it relates to who we are and where we are. And then just anchoring ourselves in a source of connectivity of the God of us all. And that's one way I would say we try to maintain some type of heritage. I'm going to invite Dr. Dacour to share a little bit, because I forgive me.
That's okay.
Yeah. I mean, I could definitely agree with everything that you said. I also think that we try, well, in the Catholic faith, coming back from slavery and everything, we definitely had African slaves who masked their animistic faith within the Catholic faith by still worshiping the same God and goddesses, but just using the Catholic saints in their place. Because actually there were a lot of God and goddesses, or not, but a lot of those religious figures mirrored each other in both faiths. And so you can find different ways to kind of blend them together. And I think that's kind of what happened with Catholicism. And then we do have the shift from Catholicism to other, religions that we definitely know throughout, New Orleans and throughout the world. And that all comes back from the African roots of, the animistic beliefs. So we have, like, of course, the voodoo, and then we have candomblé, and we have sangria, and all these different areas that still pay homage to a lot of the African faith.
Mm-hmm. Incredible. Thank you. Thank you for that. Both of you. Thank you so much. Quick rapid round of questions. We're going to close out here with our panelists. And I just want to do rapid fire, going from each one of you to just say to us your final thoughts on the documentary. I know we're anticipating by this time next week, we'll be watching it almost in a week and a day from now. So final thoughts, Dr. Vincent?
Those scholars that they have on the program, those talking heads, as I call them, experts, all of them have outstanding books. I'm thinking about Evelyn Brooks Hickenbotham's book on righteous discontent, Cornel West's book on race matters. Skip Gates has a number of books. So I'd encourage our audience to be sure to obtain some of these books, some of their writings online, and just share this with their loved ones, with their families, with their communities, and with those that they have influence with. So I'm looking forward to this. And certainly when many of these schools were started, this is the last point I want to mention, some of them, such as the religious program started at Howard by Benny Mays, he wanted to train, along with Howard Thurman, and it's discussed in this, they wanted to train a series of ministers similar to what the law school was doing under Charles Hamilton Houston, with training pastors and leaders to go out and help change the dynamics of how we viewed our religion, how the religion could be used in many aspects of our lives. And certainly when he went to Morehouse, Benny Mays was there, when Dr. King was there, and they had some of the same philosophies. So continue to read and watch the documentary, listen to these experts, and read some of their books.
Yes, the voice of a history professor. Ms. Davis, your final thoughts.
I'm looking forward to seeing the full 4 hours, not just for the musical aspects, of course, but just for the historical part of the Black church and um, finding out things that I didn't know. Just even in the 25 minutes, it opened my eyes to some things about the Black church that I just probably took for granted. Even, and we brought this out in our discussion last week about the finances being provide, or the finances for the civil rights movement being funded by the Freedom Singers. We knew that, but we take for granted how much music plays a part in finances, even in the church. And there's some other things we're looking at. The political side is very interesting, especially in the day that we're living in right now. It just goes to show me, as well as hopefully the other people that are listening and watching, how far we've come. We still have a long ways to go. And I think this documentary is going to open our eyes and help us move forward to reaching where we need to, reaching that final part in our lives, rather.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. And yes, Dr. Gates did say that. He said, you know, this is one of the most important ones that he thinks he's done. So I think it is going to have that kind of impact on our community. Reverend Brisbane, your final thoughts.
Yes, one of the things that I love seeing just in the snippets, just seeing how you have a dual mentorship that's taking place in order to propel us into being activists in the whole nine. And so I just pray that we will continue to embrace and embody that as we're moving forward, because we need a dual mentorship and hearing what is being said and how do we live it out as we move forward. Because again, if you didn't have the seasoned along with the zeal, we could not have a movement. And so how do we continue to create a movement that will continue to sustain and provide a legacy beyond today?
Absolutely. We've still got to deal with that intersection of race, religion, and politics, because that's what's at the forefront of what we are dealing with today. So that is important. Thank you, Reverend Brisbane. And finally, Dr. Senegal DeQueer.
Yeah, I think that this is an extremely important documentary. I think it's the right time to have this documentary. It's about time that we've had this documentary to commemorate the legacy, the heritage of the African-American churches. And again, like I said, it's the right time. It's the right time because we need to show our young people the struggle that we faced before. They need to understand that struggle. They need to understand that they could lean on the Black church because they're going to need that support to continue the fight in the Black Lives Matter movement. So I think this is the right time for it.
Definitely. And going back to something that Ms. Davis said, that, you know, so much we take for granted. And I think absent knowing the history of the Black church, you will take the church and its progress, or just wherever it stands in your life, you may take it for granted, not recognizing the struggle that got us to this place of freedom, and even in this country, as it relates to freedom of religion, something that we have perhaps taken for granted, and we certainly enjoy the benefits of that. So thank you. Dr. Vincent, Ms. Davis, Reverend Brisbane, and Dr. Senegal DeQueer, thank you all for the time that you've shared with us this evening. This has been such an important and meaningful topic for us, and I wish we had more time to converse on it. We don't. But on that same note, I want to let you know that LPB is doing an even deeper dive into the topic on their weekly statewide news program, Louisiana, the state we're in. It airs on Fridays, every Friday, and on Fridays in February at 7 p.m., we'll get a chance to see Karen St. Cyr talk about this deeper dive that she's taken. And Karen, I gave you a new name. Kara is joining us this evening to talk a bit about the series. Kara?
Yeah, so like you said, we're going to be putting together our own documentary focusing on Black churches, but of course ours is going to have a little bit more of a Louisiana twist, because a lot of the things that are mentioned in the PBS documentary are things that have happened here. You know, our churches have been involved in civil rights movements. Our churches have been involved in breaking racial barriers and influencing pop culture. So we're definitely going to be focusing on those aspects. And another thing that we're also going to be bringing to the forefront is Catholicism, because for Louisiana, that is a huge part of our culture. Because like Dr. Charlene said earlier, she mentioned that this state was colonized by the French and the Spanish, and that influence still sticks with us today. So we're going to be taking a deeper dive into all of those topics and really bringing it home about how this state and our churches have influenced not only, you know, the Black community, but also just American history, because Black history is American history. So like you said, we're going to be having different episodes that are going to be airing each Friday in February. And then in March, we're going to be having one big documentary that's just going to cover every one of those topics in detail. So I hope you guys are able to tune in.
Thank you, Kara, and welcome to the LPB family. So we look forward to watching your series on Louisiana, the state we're in. And for those of you who are watching online tonight, watch your email for a survey about tonight's event. We want you to complete the survey, the online survey that is, and you'll be entered into a drawing, and you could win a free LPB passport membership. That's your access to all the programs on LPB at any time you like, and that membership is a great thing to have, sort of like LPB on demand. You can pull up any program you like at any time. So once again, LPB would like to extend our thanks to our partners who helped make this evening possible. Louisiana's HBCU Advisory Council, that's Southern University, Dillard University, Xavier University, and Grambling State University. We thank you for that. And our local support is being provided by State Farm, ExxonMobil of Baton Rouge, Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana, and CSRS. And we want to thank you for joining us. And for more on Louisiana's Black Church, you can go to lpb.org/theblackchurch. And remember to tune into your local LPB station on February 16th and 17th to watch the series, The Black Church, This Is Our Story, This Is Our Song. I am Robyn Merrick, wishing you all a very good night. Thank you.